Hello, everyone. This is Grandmaster Hans Zeman back with the chapter regarding the move 2e6. We're going to be reaching the second move e6 after d4, knight of 6, knight c3, and e6. And I had quite a bit of dilemma over what to recommend here because we could obviously transpose into the French with e4. But if I started recommending a French course here, I feel like it would just sort of lose the entire point of it being a Jobava London course. I think I started working on a French file and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Maybe I should go for this. And then I was like, yeah, no. So I don't think I'm going to be making a French course. Maybe I'll make, like a crush the French course. But definitely not going to be trying to beat the entire French within a Jobava London course. I think I could do it, but I'm definitely not going to be doing it in this course. So this isn't going to change much. We're going to continue with the move bishop to f4 and the same developmental plans, right? So there are a few transpositions here. If opponents go for d5, knight b4, we transpose to move 3 e6. Bishop b4 is going to be the main difference. Now we're going to go queen to d3. So this is sort of the, in Jobava London spirit, bringing our queen out early. I felt like that this was only appropriate. This is sort of the first, this is the main place where our opponent can really go for different setups. So I suppose d5 is the most natural. There's knight to d5. There's b6, which is a bit of a weirder move, but it's interesting. It's played once or twice. Castles, of course, is very natural. And c5, going for some very interesting stuff. So you can consider this the starting position in this chapter and where things start to evolve. So I think d5 is the first position and the most natural move. We're going to play a3. And now bishop d6 is sort of the only serious move because obviously you don't really want to give up this bishop. Bishop e7 wouldn't make much sense. If you can challenge this bishop, you're going to challenge this bishop. And this is where things get quite fun. After bishop d6, our opponent has two options to capture, queen d6 and c takes d6. After c takes d6, I'm just going to give you a second and just guess, what's my favorite move? What's the atypical move of the entire opening? g4, of course. It wouldn't be the opening without g4. Point being that we'd like to play g5, again, kicking the knight, taking kingside space. Our opponents have to take this pawn. Why not? We go queen g3, of course, another. The queen is going to go on quite an adventure today. Knight f6, queen g7, rook g8, queen h6, knight c6, and we castle. Things, and again, I could write an entire book on this position, but I think it's clear that black's a bit uncomfortable, right? Because this king is in the center. It's not quite clear where it's going to go. And again, you're just sort of just going to, develop your pieces, e3, and bring the bishop and knight out. Bishop can come to b5, perhaps, knight to f3. The g file can be used. And again, the king is just awkward, right? And I think whenever we can put our opponent's king in an awkward situation, it puts some pressure, right? And that's usually quite effective. So this is sort of one of the main variations, but I think there are many more other ones that I'd like to discuss. For example, queen takes d6, and now we actually just get an advantage after e4. We take the advantage to break in the center, knight e4, queen e4, knight d7, castles. And in this case, for example, if I ended it here, but okay, if knight f6, we go queen h4, and the queen is ready. If the king decides to castle, knight comes to f3, bishop comes to d3, again, g4. Everything is already ready, right? The attack is extremely fast. So in this case, queen d6 and after e4, it actually sort of reminds me of a French position, but everything is just so fast. And the initiative is extremely fast. Like, of course, if you castle first without knight d7, you can go bishop d3 already, as an option possibly, right? And then it's awkward how you prevent the checkmate. You wouldn't really, want to go g6, right, to mess up the structure. So it's already a bit uncomfortable in this main line, right? So okay, also knight d5 is sort of make sense, right, to attack the bishop. But here you actually have bishop d2, knight takes, and we take with a pawn. For this extra tempo is crucial, forcing the bishop back. it can go to a5, it can also go to e7. If a5, we continue with e4, c5, and then we go h4. And again, I didn't want to go into too much depth here. I tried to I tried to sort of cut things down in certain moments, but then give deep explanations. So basically, the point is we're going to go h5. Okay, I've already drawn the arrows. Pressure on h6. We can go rook h3, rook g3 to put pressure on g7. The king is never really going to be able to castle just due to how strong the attack is. Knight is coming to f3. The play is very natural. Let's say the bishop goes to e7. We play queen to g3. And of course, after castles, we go e4 and d6, and then we go h4. And again, the same idea, right? h5, bishop d3, knight f3, and we have quite a nice attack against the black king. So queen knight d5 isn't much of a worry. b6 is also quite an interesting move, and just developing the bishops this way, which makes some sense. And we're going to play queen f3 here, which again, I think a lot of times I suggest moves that are just basic threats, but they have quite deep ideas. So after knight c6, we castle. And the point is after bishop e7, we play d5. Again, breaking things open immediately. And our opponent sort of can't really take the pawn. Like if you take and you allow takes, takes. Again, you can't really castle because of the d7 pawn. And this queen's actually quite strong on d5 because you don't really want to go knight a5, right? Because it's sort of defeating the purpose. And again, knight f3, there's going to be some sort of king set attack. So you want to go knight e7, right? To say, okay, I'm pinning you. What are you going to do? Here we continue with e4. Again, putting a really quick pressure and forcing our opponent to make some difficult moves, right? Here you already have two options, right? You have knight g6, and you also have bishop takes c3. Let's say knight g6, just for an example, is already actually a significant mistake. You go knight to e2. And the point is that if you take back on d5, you actually play e5, pushing past. And the next plan is to play knight takes d5, right? So here, if knight f4, queen f4, knight d4, we play knight d4, knight d4, knight to g3. And you might wonder, what are we doing? Why are we sacrificing a pawn? But the development is going to be extremely strong. E4 obviously can be recaptured. The knight's going to come in. Again, the king is sort of just sitting there idly by, it doesn't have that much defense. And the only way to actually survive here is after queen e7, knight e4 to play castles queenside. But this, the sequence doesn't even stop here. We go knight to d6, cd6, ed6, takes, rook d6, rook d4. And we've sort of compromised our opponent's structure, gotten the isolated pawn, and next we just play simple, slow chess. And okay, there's some slight initiative for black. But once that initiative just calms down and everything is solid, then again, the king is a bit weak. And okay, with an isolated pawn, a lot of things can happen in a long game. So, of course, forcing our opponent to play such an idea would be just ridiculous. Let's say they were to take on d5, bishop takes e3, which is the strongest move, and knight takes e4. But this is, of course, ridiculous as well, to allow queen takes g7, rook g8, and then to, of course, play queen takes h7, allowing this, but it's actually not that bad. After knight f6, queen d3, knight takes, bishop d2. And again, okay, the computer has conflicting views here, but okay, with the two bishops and this sort of nice pawn mass, I would say that this imbalance gives white a slight advantage. You might aim to push this pawn. At some point, you might kick out the knight with c4, but I guess the main point will be just to maybe play f3 at some point as well to just shut down this bishop. Again, imbalanced game, both sides have chances, but I would prefer white here, and that's certainly why I'm recommending it. So here, that would force our opponents to actually, knight g5 is an idea. We play queen c7, knight d4, takes. And again, this move, fe6, is just not natural at all, like knight h3. And again, computer might say equal, slight advantage, but the structure is just a little bit weak. An example of way, rook c8, let's say you want to get rid of the bishop pair. Again, the structure is sort of advantageous, like the open h file is nice. Yeah, this sort of slight edge is just really great from a practical perspective to apply practical pressure. I hope you have not forgotten the word practical pressure because I've truly said that word one too many times. So going back, another option, here is to play e takes d5. But again, bishop c7, queen g3, putting amazing, unilateral pressure, knight e4, queen g7 here. And in all forced lines in places where we're putting pressure on opponent, there has to be a forced draw, right? So of course, rook g5, queen h8, rook g8, queen e5 is a forced draw, right? So, but like this whole sequence, right, to play e d5, allowing bishop takes c7, queen c8, it just looks so weird. So I think we can cut our opponents some slack here in terms of finding such a move. But I think that I think b6 is obviously very unlikely, but I think it's just important to illustrate sort of we do want to put immediate pressure break in the center. And again, it's not that important that you memorize this. Okay, anyways, castles is one of them, it's not like suggested as like the first move, but it's quite a common move and one that I face. And after a3 takes, knight d5 I faced a lot. Like this position I reached like a few times and should be featured in the model games. Knight d7 and knight c3 has been played by a few others, but again, knight c6 is more active, e3. And again, the point is just you can castle queenside and as well, the same sort of ideas with attacking the king. Okay, I ended it here, but you can show more. It's like queen e7, bishop to d3, pressure. Again, just sort of slight advantage, some slight attack. Typical style of the Jobava London. There's also a d6, which might be natural, but now you actually go bishop g5, and the pin is extremely strong. And the idea is next to actually just go f3, e4. Let's say knight d7, f3, and you're simply going to go e4, bishop d3, knight e2, and you maintain the bishop pair. And it's quite hard for black to do anything here. Especially once you play e4, you take control of the entire center. In combination with the bishop pair is a lethal combo. So the last sort of interesting move, which leads to some really interesting complications. And again, maybe there's an argument to be made that I went into too much detail here. But I think in terms of lifetime repertoire, I personally feel that there's no such thing as too much detail. I think that a lot of the variations, once you go through these and you sort of see the common ideas, it's more about internalizing the themes than internalizing the specific variations. So c5 is an interesting way to challenge things immediately and has been played in a few games as well and seems to be sort of a theoretical debate. You play knight a6, immediately going for this, castles. Queen a5, again, putting pressure here, preparing knight takes c5. Here we play bishop e5. It's a theme that actually we've seen before, sort of protecting the c3 knight. We've seen this in many different types of positions. And here there's actually a crazy variation after knight g4, bishop d4, e5. I'm actually go h3. Point being, if you take, I'm actually going to go check, and then knight d5. Threatening checkmate. Next, I'm going to recuperate the knight. Rook e8, queen g4, queen a2, knight b4, queen a1 here, queen b2, and of course, forced draw. So I wouldn't say these forced draws should like scare you. Like, oh my god, like is this Anish Giri suggesting a course? Showing all these forced draws. But the basic point is like, let's say they go for knight g4. This is quite a difficult, right? h3, knight, queen e4. It's quite a powerful, in this position after, there's also bishop takes c5, which should be noted. Rook e8, queen g4, queen a2. Also you might even think to recapture. It's not so obvious that you should just sack the piece and make the repetition. But again, this is also just unrealistic to reach for many of you. But another point is, let's say just knight c5, the most natural move, queen d4. And this actually transposes. So let's go from where the transposition started. Knight c5, queen d4, then queen a5, which is a more natural order. Bishop e5, again, the same theme, covering the c3 knight. Here, they can take immediately and go for, go pawn grabbing, which leads to some ridiculous complications. But the more natural way would also be to play d5, a3 takes, b6, and after f3, we reach this this endgame. And in this case, sort of the idea is that we have the two bishops, and we're simply just going to play like very slow chess. You can go h4, h5 to take some space here. You can go knight h3, knight f2. You can go knight e2, knight g3. Again, the bishop pair is quite nice. You can go b3, king b2 to sort of improve things on that route. I think the bishop pair is just a nice win condition here, and makes for a very simple play. But let's say our opponents have a more direct approach in mind. We can play f3 again. knight a4, queen d4, d5, e4, and I wrote this in the annotations, and you're going to see this throughout the course, right? Like, I'll just really, let me remind you once again that it's not critical to memorize the entire variation, but it's important to show you how things can develop. Also, if you're a very strong, very strong grandmaster, this might be very useful for your preparation. So again, I think this is just instructive, but sometimes people, might be overwhelmed. So castles, bishop d3, preparing to take, and again, attacking possibilities. Bishop d7, knight h3, bringing the knight in. And the funny thing here is rook to d8 is the best move. And like, I just don't even get it. When I try to explain rook d8, it's only can be explained with, if I try to like explain it in an actual way, the point is you actually take, and then you go rook c8. And then you're like, what's the rook doing on d8? Because it's not really clear what it's doing on d8. Because you might ask, like, why not just like rook c8 immediately? And I honestly just can't even answer that question. That just shows like it's just so ridiculous how these variations go. So it takes, bishop takes, and of course queen a1, of course queen takes b2, of course bishop takes h7. Oh my god, what an obvious move. If takes, we have check, king g8 takes here in main. So king f8 is forced. We go into this endgame, and then in this position, it might play e takes d5 and rook takes. Might also just protect the pawn and trade this. So we're going to have a very imbalanced position. We'll be up a pawn, if I can count correctly. I think I can count correctly. I have been wrong in counting and recording this. There have been times where I've had to physically count on my hands. I guess I'm still in kindergarten. But, basically, okay, we can show how ridiculous this long variation is. And, okay, pawn grabbing, I think, is just... And I'd like to note that, like, all these moves that black are playing are, like, completely only moves. And it's just the ridiculous amount of precision to make this work is just not realistic. Because, okay, when you take a pawn, and you give up the bishop pair, and you have a knight on a4, queen a2, it's just a bit too awkward, right? So, okay, anyways. And the c5 is a bit of a stretch, but... I saw some games here, and I thought it was an interesting theoretical place to explore. So here, some top players have certainly explored and analyzed it. But again, I'd still say there's a lot of room for improvement. So yeah, I think this is, I've covered sort of from a theoretical perspective, I've covered the critical lines. But again, the main point is to sort of keep things in Jobava style, because this order, could be tempting to go into a French. But again, here you're keeping the structure, and this might be considered the anti-Jobava system. Some people consider it, right? But in order to even play, like some of your opponents, right, might not even play this because they're uncomfortable. Like if you go into the French, it might make them uncomfortable, right? Like French players are probably the only people who are playing this, because a non-French player isn't really going to be comfortable with you going into French, because they're going to be more uncomfortable about the French than you are. Maybe if they're just psychological wizards, they're going to be like, he thinks that I know the French because I'm playing this order, so that means that they won't play the French because they think that I know the French. But in fact, I don't know the French, but I know that they don't like the French. So I'm going to go into allow the French to make them think that I don't like the French, that I like the French, to avoid the French, to play the specific system. And yeah, I think that's how I'll end the video. Thanks, guys. Thank you guys for watching, and I look forward to the next chapter.